I'm so excited to get this group together. I'm sad that we can't all be in person, but it's so amazing to have friends from around the country as well as family here because we are virtual. So I'm going to lean into that and welcome everybody. And we look forward to including you in any engaged conversation towards the end of our time together. So you will be able to unmute yourself and ask Shane or KK any questions in the last 15 minutes or so. And I'm just going to share a little bit about Shane now and pass it to you. So instead of reading a traditional bio, I just thought that I would talk about Shane and then in a few minutes, KK as dear friends and women in my life, and share a little bit about them from my perspective, knowing that you can go online and Google them and read all of their formal credentials. So I really met Shane as the leader and CEO of Liberty Hill and just find her to be one of the truest and most authentic champions of Los Angeles and beyond. She really lifts up others' voices and actions by bringing people together under a wider umbrella fighting social injustices. So thank you, Shane. And you've really been a mentor and role model for me in this work from day one. She's also one of the best public speakers out there. She's really authentic and focused and passionate and real. And I appreciate that about you so much as well. And you're also just a tireless partner and friend to so many in the community. I think in really big ways and small ways, how you partner with other organizations and large funders down to your relationships with your team and board members like me at Liberty Hill. So thank you for that as well. And I also see you as somebody that's a fabulous leader, but you're always growing and learning. And I appreciate that too. I think we can never be too old to learn and be curious. And you're also super fun and positive and funny and always willing to laugh and sort of have that balance with all of the stress that I think comes with the type of work that you do. And finally, you're a loving mother and friend and wife. And I just see you sharing credit with your family and everybody else around you, both your family team and your work team. So I wanted to recognize you for that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton to Shane to welcome us as well. And then I'll jump in and introduce KK, and she's going to give us a really wonderful presentation around her book.
Thank you so much, Marta. That was beautiful, and don't believe a word she said. I don't want to disappoint you, but I really appreciated that, Marta. And thank you so much for opening up your virtual home to this conversation, inviting so many friends from around the country. I'm excited to see you all and share a little bit about Liberty Hill with you, and also hear from KK about her work. So Liberty Hill is LA's home for progressive philanthropy, and we equip leaders in communities facing systemic oppression with the tools and resources and relationships they need to fight these David and Goliath battles for social justice and equity, racial justice, economic justice, and win. And I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I will turn it back to you, Marta.
There you go. Super excited for the two of you to talk with each other as well. So KK, I have known you since high school, since freshman year in high school. And KK is a dear friend and a fierce mother, daughter, sister, and wife who I admire so much as one of my longest time friends. And I'm thrilled that I was able to pull together this collaboration between Shane and an organization that I appreciate and respect so much, and KK and all of the work and human being that you are and that you're doing. KK is a successful writer, photographer, published author. She has an MBA, but she's also this warm, loving, strong woman all at once, which I so admire. And you're also incredibly generous, reliable, and loyal. And I can say that because I've known you for about 10 years, a little longer. And your can't not do is to be creative with, to use your creativity to really inspire your fight around injustices around the world, and especially in our country. And I know there's a little bit to KK's backstory that's international in terms of what's sparked that, if we have time for you to share that. And when I think of you, I think of someone who has always created and shared beauty with others and likes herself enough to navigate life without needing a lot of external validation, which is really a testament to the inner peace and love that you exude. And I just wanted to share that publicly about you, just since a number of the people on this call don't know you well enough to see that, but I really see that in you and appreciate it. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to let you take us off into a journey around your book.
Well, thank you so much, Marta, and thank you, Shane and Liberty Hill. It's really, when Marta asked me to come and talk with you and talk about the book and some of the common themes, I was pretty excited because it's great work that you're doing. And thank you for everybody who came out this evening or stayed in or whatever we're doing to just sort of share around some of these ideas and talk about engagement and activism, both in the book that I just completed and then also in the work at Liberty Hill. So I'm going to do just a quick overview of the book. It is a visual book. It's part photos and part interviews in activists' own words. So the idea is that you sort of have the intimate experience of getting to sit down and talk with them. So we'll do a little, I'll share my screen here and we'll go through a few of the profiles and then we can come back and talk about the major themes as a group. As I said, this is a book called Activist Portraits of Courage, and it is a visual book, and it's a book that uses first-person narrative to try to tell the stories of activists. I'm going to start with a quote that probably many people have heard. A time comes when silence is betrayal, a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think the reason we're going to start with it is this is sort of, I see this as sort of undergirding all activism, and probably the reason that many of us are on this call too and involved in Liberty Hill. Sort of the idea that there comes a time for each and every one of us when there is something that, whether specific or more general, that really pricks our conscience and we feel like we have to do something, say something, get involved in some way. And over the last however many years, as sort of the dialogue is deteriorated in this country, there's been increased polarization, there are all sorts of serious systemic issues, and we've been wrestling with those as a country and trying to figure out how to do something about it. I thought that it would be really useful to speak with activists from across the generations, across the issues, and even across the ideological spectrum about what it was that led them to get involved, to take action, and sort of so the very personal stories. And again, the format of the book is sort of I'll show you here a little close up, sort of a, you can see there's an intimate portrait and then the words. And so again, the idea is that we each get to hear these stories, and hopefully by talking with some of these individuals, by sitting down with them virtually, we get a sense of their stories. So even the ones with whom we disagree, and there will be people in here, you may see them, just if you can see our little pictures here, who we feel you feel very differently from. But at the same time, I think that's kind of the point, because you want to hear the individual stories, the courage that it takes to stand up, even across this difference. And hopefully that will, help us hear each other better, sort of rekindle some of this dialogue that's been missing, and just open our eyes to what people are going through. I think one of my favorite comments from somebody who'd been to a book talk of mine was, they wrote me afterwards and they said, I went home and I was so excited to read the book. I was so excited to read about my own activist, heroes. But before I even let myself do that, I sat down and read all the ones with whom I disagreed, which I think is so great, because that's really trying to sort of see the humanity in each other and listen. And so that's what I set out to do. And it's been an amazing journey talking to all these, as you can see, many of them are sort of these activist icons: Angela Davis, John Lewis, Marion Wright Edelman, Ralph Nader, Alicia Garza, Black Lives Matter, lots of really wonderful stories. And then some who, you probably don't know or don't know as well. So it's an incredible group, and it just sort of speaks to the individual power to take action, to start something, whether it's a group of one or a group of three or hundreds of people showing up to figure out how to make change. So I'm going to start. What I'll do is I'll go through just one story, and I'll share some of the words of the late Congressman John Lewis, who, this is one of my favorite pictures from the whole book, and it was also one of my favorite interviews. And for the context of this conversation, what I'm going to focus on is something that I raised with each of them, which was, what was it that sort of launched your activist journey? What was it that made you stand up and speak out? And that's because I think it's something that we all think about in different ways. How can we get involved? And so, with John Lewis, he was talking about growing up in the Jim Crow South and, going with his brothers and sisters and cousins and trying to check out books at the library and, not being able to do that and seeing the signs that said white and colored and being frustrated and angry, and talking with his parents and his grandparents and his great grandparents. And they said, just that's just the way it is. Just don't make trouble. Don't get in the way. And, he was so frustrated. But then he talked about being 15 years old and listening to the radio one day and hearing a speech by Dr. King and just feeling like it was just coming directly to him, speaking, saying, John, Robert, you can do something, you can get involved. And so it just spoke to him. And then he followed everything about the bus boycott in Montgomery and, so the words of Dr. King and then the actions of Rosa Parks just stirred up something in him. He said that you cannot be at home with yourself when you see something that's not right, not fair, and you don't do something about it. And so from that launched his activism, and he started sitting in on the lunch counters and was one of the original Freedom Riders, and then fought for voting rights. And of course, he, put himself in great danger. And I think what's one thing that's so beautiful about his story, I'm going to read just a little bit from it. He talks about being on the Freedom Ride in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And he said, members of the Klan beat us and left us in a pool of blood. In 2009, one of the guys that beat us came to this office, his congressional office. And he said, Mr. Lewis, I'm one of the people that beat you and your seatmate. Will you forgive me? I want to apologize. His son started crying first. Then he started crying. They hugged me. I hugged them back. And the three of us cried together. That is the power of the way of love, the power of the philosophy of nonviolence. You come to that point where you respect the dignity and worth of every human being. And so he talks about nonviolence as one of those immutable principles that you cannot deviate from, and that concept has continued to influence him the rest of his life. So even if someone is beating you, knocking you down, even if you're on the ground trying to protect your head, you try to maintain eye contact and let the person who's trying to hurt you see your humanity. So I think what was so powerful, there's a lot that's so powerful in that, but even when you're facing this, you try to maintain eye contact, you try to connect as human beings across all this difference. So his ability to forgive, but also his ability to really highlight the humanity and see the humanity in everybody. And so that's what I was hoping to do with this book also, was to try to have people understand, the bravery, the courage, where people are coming from and why they're doing this. So I'll share another one. Ai-jen Poo, who I guess is going to be honored by Liberty Hill next month, is it? Is a phenomenal activist, and she's organized for domestic worker rights. And she talks about when she was first turned on to that, when she was volunteering in New York, and she was on a hotline, and these women who were suffering domestic violence were not able to leave their abusers because they could not support themselves and their children on their own with the wages they were making as domestic workers. And so that's how she started organizing that. For Nicole Maines, if there are any fans of Supergirl, she's the first trans superhero. And she talks about growing up when she was 10 years old in a small town in Maine, and the school suddenly refused to let her use the bathroom of the gender with which she identified. And so she and her parents fought it all the way up to the Maine Supreme Court and eventually won. But again, this is as a 10-year-old, she had to take that on. Alicia Garza, who is one of the 3 women behind the Black Lives Matter movement. And she talks about just weeping, waking up weeping in the middle of the night after the acquittal of George Zimmerman for the murder of Trayvon Martin, and just looking for community and, in this rage and grief and trying to find community around this. And she had been an organizer already. And so she and the 2 other women knew how to sort of take that energy and really channel it into a movement. Edward Snowden talks about what he saw as a contractor at the NSA, and that he'd sort of seen this mass surveillance that was, people didn't understand. It wasn't out in the open, and that there were no official channels he could go through. And so he's like, I didn't want to do this, but whistleblowers are elected by circumstances. It's not about who you are, it's about what you see. And he had seen this, and so he felt he had to act. There are many other stories. I'm going to fly through some photos here. Wonderful activists from across the spectrum, young and old, the great Harry Belafonte in his early 90s, who've been, and many of these folks have been at it for more than 50 years. So I think just want to end with the idea, which again, this is probably why everybody's here, is that it's not enough to believe something, you have to stand for something, because that's the only way things change.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, this is the second time that I've heard KK speak publicly about her book, and it always gives me the chills in a good way. It's just so moving, and what an honor and experience that you've had to meet with and speak to and photograph such incredible and a wide variety of people, and to share it with all of us.
No, and over the last years, with all the negativity out there, being able to speak with these individuals who've really risked a lot, for what they believed in, has been super inspiring.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I remember a few years ago, or maybe even longer now, you reaching out to me about a few of the names on your list, just to see if I had any direct connections. So I remember when you started the project, and similarly when you were working on your first book, Great Americans, and they both, I feel like, not planned, but came out at really opportune, wonderful times, and times where our country and our world needed healing. And I feel like your work has helped us learn and heal and navigate. So clearly, I'm really inspired by each of you, and I'm excited to be here together in this moment to enjoy connecting the 2 of you, and also sharing this conversation with other friends who are also, I believe, very passionate about justice and activism, and also creativity and communicating. So I would love to hear your backstory from each of you again, and so that it can be shared with everyone on the call, just eliciting why you do the work you do. So maybe I'll ask Shane to share first, since you weren't speaking most recently.
Sure. And KK, I really love that presentation. Thank you so much for sharing. It's just such beautiful, beautiful photographs and stories. So what's my backstory? I want to be interviewed by KK one day. That's my that's my goal. I grew up in Santa Monica. I think somebody on the call is there now, and grew up poor with my little brother and our parents. And I don't know how my dad did this exactly, but he somehow helped me to see through my childhood that my poverty was a result of injustice. And it's hard for a kid to see, I think, because we want to blame our parents or ourselves. And he really helped me to understand the larger kind of structural conditions that constrained our opportunities. And so, I grew up with all of the pain and anger that people who are poor grow up with. And eventually, both my parents passed away when I was young, and my brother ended up going to jail when he was 17 and I was 20. And I think all of that together really left me wanting to fight like hell to make sure no one had to go through what my family went through. And also because I loved and admired my dad, especially, and my little brother so much, I knew in my gut that people like them have the solutions and have the power within them to change the world. And So I was attracted to community organizing and social change. Liberty Hill's motto is change, not charity, which is the perfect motto for me. I did not found Liberty Hill, but it's very much my spirit, because I think, social change really identifies that the people who are closest to the problems are the ones who have the solutions and need to be supported to fight and lead these battles. And I think my dad and my brother taught me that, and that has fueled my my activism and my work in social justice for the 25 years since then.
Thanks, Shane. KK?
Great. Yeah, that's wonderful. I think, well, I got started with sort of the writing and the photography early on. There are a couple of high school folks on here, and you know that I was always with that. But I was always curious about people's stories. And I think Shane's point about the people who are going through things are the people who should be talking about them and sharing them and helping people figure them out. And so I think that, the kind of interviewing that I've done focuses on people's stories in their own words. And of course, you edit and you're sort of, you have to make choices, but the idea is to figure out who they are authentically and have that voice come across, not your own. And so, was always figuring out, I sort of started with the photography and sort of capturing those visions and trying to share stories. And I think, maybe the curiosity for those stories came from having lived abroad when I was very small. I think the first school I went to was in Maori, and I didn't speak any, and I felt pretty out of it, but except for brush your teeth class, I could do that. But everything else, I was kind of out of it. And so, but I, and then when I was in middle school, also living abroad, and you just realize, you have a sense of perspective on where you are. And you also, you see the differences and you appreciate the differences. They're incredibly rich and intricate, and you learn about these things. But at the same time, you learn, how much more is in common. And so that sort of breaks it down. And so it's, you sort of see the common humanity wherever you go, no matter what. You don't see the difference. You sort of see the differences, and they're cool, and you want to learn about them. But, at the end of the day, you realize how very similar we are. And so trying to tell those stories that sort of help break down some of those barriers, and have us see each other for who we really are is what kind of has guided my work.
That makes a lot of sense, and especially just tying into your John Lewis story, how much that resonated with you in terms of your ethos.
Yeah.
So further grounding us in the work, I love, KK, that your book and also Liberty Hill's imagery on the website and just sort of throughout all of the materials and the lexicon themes and art and values are all so in common. So from quotes like "Love not hate makes America great" and "A woman's place is in the revolution," to "A time comes when silence is betrayal" that you shared, KK, earlier. And I'm just curious, who do you look up to as your North Star? It can be more than one. And what words from this person are most meaningful in guiding your purpose, and why?
Yeah. Well, I think, going back to the John Lewis one where I started with, and I think that those ideas, the idea that you cannot be at home with yourself, when you see something that isn't right, unless you do something. I sort of saw that. I think that's said so beautifully. Like, it just really captures the feeling. And I heard it in so many of the activists, different versions of it. And also in just the peace that, these people who were facing great danger to their reputations, physically, the fact that you could still sort of find that peace because you were in harmony with your values, basically. And so even though it's dangerous, there was a sense of peace and commitment, and joy in it, because you're in sync with your values. So I think that's a very powerful quote for me.
Shane?
Yes. I got to meet John Lewis a few years ago when we honored him at Liberty Hill, and I love so much how you shared his story. And I agree that, just being in his presence, to think about the violence that he endured and that he did keep going and found that love in his heart and that humanity in himself and in others. I always think about, if he could do that, then I can do whatever I'm called to do. I mean, and whenever it feels like I'm under fire or tested, I think about John Lewis, and I do my best to rise to the occasion, because he did, and I think we owe it to his legacy and to ourselves to do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I was thinking about in response to your question, Marta, is my favorite quote, which is by Frederick Douglass, which is, "Power concedes nothing without a demand."
Mm-hmm.
It goes on; it's quite good, but I love that, both because it talks about power, which I think we don't talk enough about, how power works, how it's wielded, how it's built, but also that I believe it's true that power concedes nothing without a demand, and I do think that requires that we find within ourselves the truth of who we are, what we need, and demand it.
I think it also speaks to the maintenance of power, right? Like, it's built, but then I think part of our societal issues are for how many centuries that power is maintained within a certain group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd love to just jump in on that one, because that's one of those things what I feel like it really captures the activism too, because you have to press and make people uncomfortable and speak out, and and I guess the later part of that you were alluding to is that it's like wanting crops without the thunder and the lightning and the rain. You need that, and if you don't have that disruption, if you don't have those sort of more violent, well, not violent, but agitating aspects, then you can't get to the good stuff.
Yeah, and I think the deeper part even is where he goes on to say something like, I won't do it justice, but it's something about how we, it's about what we tolerate and what we won't tolerate, and where we draw that line is where we make the demand. And I think that's deep, when you think about those of us who've been abused by family members, by systemic oppression, being able to say, I don't deserve that, and I'm not going to tolerate it, and I'm going to fight back. That's really courage beyond what many of us can imagine.
Huge. Oh, and Melinda's typing in, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what I lost it. Thank you, Melinda.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you, Melinda. Much better than what I said.
Yeah. Well, I see other intersections between your journalism, KK, and curiosity and compelling drive to tell others powerful stories, lifting them up and shining a spotlight on their lives, and Shane's and Liberty Hill's focus on convening allies, leading policy and research initiatives, providing critical support to social justice campaigns through funding, training, and campaigns. I would love for you two to dialogue a bit about this common ground. I think we've already started that anyway. Mm-hmm. But maybe Shane, you could share a story or two, since KK already shared some stories about individuals Liberty Hill has worked with and the ways that their stories have affected you and have sort of further informed Liberty Hill's work.
Sure. So many stories. One person who comes to mind is a young man named Maynor, who's in his late teens. He's actually just about to become a dad, and I got to do an oral history with him because I got to interview a number of young people who had recently come out of jail, and just to better understand their experience. And he shared with me that when he was about 10, he had watched his father beat up his mother for many years, and one day he just decided that that was not okay, and he put his body in between his mom and his dad to stand up for her. As you can imagine, that did not go well, but he summoned the courage to stand up to his dad, and somehow, even though he got beaten up pretty badly as a result, that courage stayed with him. And he talked about later, he for really very minor issues. He ended up going to court and to youth jail in LA. But when he was confronted the judge, so this is, like 8 years after he had confronted his dad, he told the judge, I don't accept your sentence. I want, the judge was going to give him like 9 months. And the kid's like, no. And I don't want this public defender to defend me because she doesn't even know me. I'm going to defend myself and I don't deserve 9 months. The judge, okay. So he said, well, let's take a continuance. Let's come back in 30 days. Let's talk about it again. And because of his own just courage in his heart, he somehow got the sentence down to about 3 months. So he, again, just another person who it's like, if he could do that, I can do whatever it is that I need to do today. So that's one. The other one of my favorites is this young woman, Nayeli, who I met her when she was about 13, and she's super, super shy. Some of people on this call know her. Super shy, but she had been getting sick, like nosebleeds and horrible headaches and just these terrible symptoms, and no one could figure out what it was. And she started talking to her neighbors and found out that they were having similar symptoms. So she decided, well, I'm going to figure out what is causing our neighborhood to have these symptoms. And long story short, basically she and a few others in her neighborhood figure out it's the oil drilling site across the street from her house. And a few years later, now we have a policy on the city council and the county board of supervisors to eliminate neighborhood oil drilling precisely because of the health impacts it was having on her and others. But she was one of the first to figure it out and has bravely stood in front of elected bodies, media, big oil to fight for her cause. Now she's 18, she's going to college with the help of some of you, and is an extraordinary activist. So again, if she can do that, I can do this.
Super inspiring.
It's so inspiring. And I think when you tell those stories, I'm curious to see what you do with the oral histories that you take. But I think it is so important to share those stories because I think for so many of us who have not gone through those things, you read a story like that and if I were there, could I have done that? Probably not, really.
Yeah.
And I think it, it sort of, it helps us expand what we think of as, respectable, people we should respect. And, I think that's great. You're telling those stories and those kids are doing that. And I think, I think certainly in my book also I've shared this before, but with Dolores Huerta, who was one of the great labor organizers who worked with Cesar Chavez and the farm workers, she talks about having been, grown up in a very nice middle-class house, had dance lessons and went to movies and, very nice, comfortable upbringing, but was so, just was incensed at the treatment of the farm workers, just struck her as completely unjust. And she decided she was going to do something about it. And, she had 11 children. And so she would go to the meetings in the night. She would run the meetings in the night. She would go door to door. She figured it out. So again, those, the rest of us who are giving ourselves a pass for doing this or that, it's like, okay, more power to her and sort of holding ourselves to account also that, if she can show up with 11 kids, like, we can make it work too.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, KK, I love doing these oral histories so much. I'd never done something quite like that, but I'm curious, I would love to know from you, how do you do it? I mean, how do you bring out these beautiful, authentic stories, both you elicit them, but then you retell them, I think, in such a beautiful way. And I would love to get some tips.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the main thing is just whenever you're connecting with somebody, right? It's an opportunity and to meet somebody and you sort of figure out, you kind of circle each other a little bit and try to figure out, and then you kind of find the overlaps, right? The little Venn diagram, which is most of the interaction or overlap rather. And then, so I don't know, you connect and you get to listen and you don't try to say, oh, that reminds me of me, you just listen. And, which we all do sometimes, but, where you want to hear about them and you want to know what it's like. And then, and I think anything for me, if you're talking with people, if I talk with people who are well known and who give a million interviews, for those folks, the trick is to get them off of the message and to just have them actually think and engage. I guess the goal for all of them is engagement, but it's different tactics. So if it's somebody well-known who gives a million interviews, you have to figure out sort of, you tack like a sailboat, try to get into what really sparks them. Where do they come alive? What's something that they haven't just repeated on autopilot over and over? And then, it's the sense of real connection. And then the same thing. And if you talk with people who don't give a lot of interviews or maybe don't speak about this stuff, or it's really intense stuff and it's hard, I think it's, you're never after efficiency. You're not trying to get it done half hour, we're out. You sit and you talk with somebody and you honor their story. You're humble, you listen, and you just the same thing. You try to get them talking about something that really animates them, something. And so sometimes you just sort of ask like basic questions that they can answer first to get people talking. And then, then you can go into something that, you just follow their lead into something that really stirs them and makes them speak. And then, and then it's tricky. Then once you have their story, you want to treat it really carefully. You want to do justice to it. When I do it, whether it's for the newspaper magazine or whether it's for a book, you only have so much space to work with, which is why I like doing the photos also, because that will tell part of the story and then the words will tell part of it, and you put it together to try to give in a very little amount of space, the sense of somebody. And so I think it is, it's really tricky to try to do that and to do it well, but you just try to give as authentic a portrait as you were able to absorb and then try to share that back.
So I'm going to jump in because, believe it or not, we only have 15 minutes. I'm going to put my questions on hold and open it up to Q&A, and then I will wrap in about, 12 or 13 minutes with a final question to the two of you, if not more, depending on how many questions come from the audience. I know, both of you have touched on power, and I think it can really be leveraged through a lot of models. What kind of recommendations and thoughts do you each have in terms of entering and activating in this realm authentically and around power? And then I'm going to call on Nikki and Monica first.
Yeah, I think, as an organizer, I believe that there's power in numbers, and that it's, although we, highlight these individual stories as we've done tonight, that ultimately it's the collective power that really makes a difference. And I think, building that power and sharing that power is hard and the key. And I think, we all approach it in different ways. I think connecting to our authentic story, and then, either we're sort of fighting for that, in my case, poverty or, youth incarceration, or we're standing as an ally with others in their fight. And I think when we're doing that, which I also get to do, it's really important that we approach that with humility and honoring their leadership and asking them what they need and how we can support them, and making sure that their story and their voice and their community is really leading, and that we're not inadvertently or purposefully getting in the way.
I love that. And I love that about Liberty Hill's overall model and ethos. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Nikki and Monica. I believe you had a question.
Yeah, we do. Thanks for hosting this. This is fantastic. Shane, great to see you and love your work. And KK, your book is phenomenal. This was absolutely delightful. Your question.
Yeah. I echo everything Nikki says. Just out of curiosity, and I guess, Shane, I could direct it at you and KK for people that you interviewed, some of these activists. I have a background in working in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I know that a lot of the leaders and champions that we tap, it's really difficult because there's a level of minority tax that you put on them to kind of speak and be the voice for a huge population that in some cases, it's really hard to be the face of a particular demographic. Did you hear from any of them how they where they drew their strength and their courage from, especially when they hit roadblocks or they, became so divisive that they were receiving, nothing but pushback and hate? What helped propel them forward to keep fighting for the cause, for the broader population, like everything on their shoulders? I'm just curious as if you ever tapped into that, and you, Shane, and in the work that you do when you do hit those roadblocks, how do you dig, deep and pull that strength back up.
KK, I wanted to just say, I think what comes to mind is your interview with Ai-jen Poo, who is speaking at Liberty Hill's event in a month. I hope you can all come. It's free. But I was really struck by this quote, and maybe you can speak to it. I highlighted it in my book. She says, "I hear stories all the time of abuse, of non-payment of wages. You do need to be grounded in that suffering in order to do what I do and stay focused and anchored. But truthfully, from a survival standpoint, I tend to not focus on them too much because I think the role that I have in this work at this point is to be able to stay optimistic, creative, and generative, and to be able to see ways forward that are otherwise really hard to see if you're wrapped inside the suffering." If we had more time, I would love to hear so much from you, KK, about anyone who you interviewed who shared a sentiment like that, but I think it really speaks to what we're talking about, which is so hard when we've been through it ourselves. It's raw, for some of us, it'll always be raw. And so we do need to find ways to be rooted in it and accountable to it, but also protect ourselves and move past it, so that it doesn't continue to haunt us and hold us back. And all I'll say about that is it's very hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a great question, Nikki and Monica. I think Shane, thank you for highlighting that from Ai-jen. And then a different way of thinking about it also is talking with Angela Davis, for example. I'm trying to think who else, several other people, and Al Sharpton. Both of them said things to me along the lines of, because they're in great demand, especially Angela Davis. I mean, it's so hard to get her to speak anywhere. She has a million things, and she stands in for so many people. And so, and she recognizes that, and so, and in some sense, she and people have said, yes, they've done things, but so many other people have. But she's the one that everybody looks to, and that's exhausting. And you also feel like, well, I shouldn't be taking all the credit because so many people have done that. And I think that for her, for Marian Wright Edelman, for a lot of people who have been through the civil rights movement and, faced great dangers and know a lot of people who lost their lives to it, feel the sense that, a lot of people didn't make it and I'm still here. So my job is to stand up for all those people who didn't make it. So yes, I'm tired, but I'm going to keep going because that gives me energy, because I remember those people and I remember their sacrifice. And so that is what is going to keep me going, for all the people who didn't make it.
Those are two really, I think, healthy, great perspectives. We have at least 3 more questions. So just from a time perspective, we'll try to be powerful but brief in responses. So the next person is Alex, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sure. Thank you again for hosting and being here tonight. Just real quickly, I know you talked about some of the range of emotions that people you've interviewed or sort of shared their stories, fear, courage at that moment, especially for KK, who interviews so many different people. Was there sort of like not so much a common theme or something that you saw that in that moment, what fear, whatever it was, like, did you see something that just sort of came up more often than anything else?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I know that one thing that you notice is activists, I sort of assumed, okay, well, they must have a much higher threshold for discomfort. That was my assumption, because it's uncomfortable. You stand up during the Pledge of Allegiance when you're in grade, or you refuse to, or whatever it is, like, that's uncomfortable. You're uncomfortable. You're making other people around you uncomfortable. And sometimes you're making people really angry, right? And so, I asked them about that too. And some people said, no, I still, like, my hands are sweating. My heart is going like this. So it's not that, oh, hey, I'm chill, so I can handle it. It's still scary, but you push through it because you think you have to. So this sort of, you're compelled to do it, but that doesn't mean it's any easier, really. It just means you sort of, you feel comfortable that you're doing it, comfortable with yourself, but at the same time, it's still scary. It's still scary every time. That's what people tell me. So just as a human being, you're sweating, you're all this stuff, but you do it because you feel compelled to do it. So I think the feeling of being compelled, but also the feeling that they're not any different. They're just like us and they're nervous.
Thank you, KK. The next person is Melanie in New Jersey.
Hi, everyone. Gosh, everything that you've shared so far is just awesome. My question is more sort of boots on the ground, actionable. I'm curious how you both enlist allies. So like if I'm in the, male dominated white space often, and I'm always just looking for advice on how to bring people into the conversation and inspiration and in like actual action.
Shane, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think it's a lot like what KK said earlier about just building that connection and trying to understand where they're coming from and what their truth is, and in finding that common ground. And I think, in these times, understandably, I think there's a lot of dehumanization that happens, and I've gotten caught up in it. I mean, I get it, but I do think it makes it so much harder for us to realize our own humanity and to figure out how to work together for what we do believe in together. So I think, wherever I can, and I'm like not the best at this, but because I'm very opinionated and very passionate and still have my, 14-year-old's anger. But I really just try to remind myself that even if we don't agree, even if they don't see the world that as the way I do or have experienced what I have, that there's something there we can connect on, and try to start there, not starting with ideology or opinions or any of that. It's really that connection.
Okay, I'll go to John, and then Dick, you can unmute yourself after.
Hi, thanks. This has been very moving. And I'm just wrapping up teaching 105 UCLA students remotely, and so many of them passionate about environmental justice because of the communities where they grew up and experiencing it directly and wanting to do something about it. But I'm now wondering if you saw any difference in age and how people became activists and in the kind of age cohorts, and was it any different? Because I mean, it's a genuine question. I'm not sure there is. Is it the same things that motivate people no matter what their age, or have you seen, both of you, have you seen differences in the generations of activists?
I can get started, but I think it is a good question. I haven't thought it through or done a real comparison, but just thinking it through, certainly the tools have changed, right? There's social media, there's all the different ways of doing it now. But I will say that one of the commonalities that I found across probably every activist I spoke with, or maybe almost every activist, was some engagement as a young person. And so, there was something in their life, big or small, where they stood up for something. Just as the story that you shared earlier, Shane, the boy who'd stood up to his father, right? And then realized, oh, there's something in me that can do that, and it might work out, it might not. But the fact that you actually did it, and then you can, maybe there's some little thing where you push the world and it moved just a little bit. And so then the next time you feel like, oh, wow, that's possible. It just expands your realm of what's possible. So it was really interesting to see that almost every single activist had done something, whether they were 6 or 10 or 14 or 17, something where they saw some small effect. And that kind of hooked them into sort of the notion, the sense of agency that they could do something.
I know for
Shane,
me,
if you want to...
Yeah, I know, just like personally going to a school like Sidwell and starting a nonprofit in high school, like it just gives you that empowering feeling as a child. You can carry that through your adult life for sure, especially in philanthropy and activism. Dick, I think you are unmuted now if you have enough of a connection to ask your question.
What I'm wondering is, it's understandable that people with a good deal of courage can take it upon themselves to go through bad things. What question I have is, How about the people who depend on them, family, friends, who will be impacted by their connection to that person? How do they deal with that?
I can start on that one. You know, again, if we talk about Dolores Huerta, right, the woman who had 11 children, and instead of giving them the music lessons and the safe life and enough food to eat that she had growing up, just, you know, they lived down at the poverty level, you know, with the farm workers. And, you know, there's obviously some guilt, you know, as a mother, that's not the first thing you want to do for your children. But at the same time, you feel like you are doing this for them. Ultimately, you know, you are creating the kind of world that they will be valued in, you know, that is just for people. And so, you know, yeah, it's not easy, you know, and people have talked about spending the night in jail, and, you know, we're spending a long time in jail because of their actions. When there were children, when there were families depending on them, and that's a hard thing to do. And it's, you know, so it's not simple, and there, you know, and there are ramifications, obviously, for family members. So, I mean, it is something that people I spoke with wrestled with. And I think, like, one beautiful story is this sister Megan Rice, who was 82 years old when she did her first action. And one of the reasons she did it was she was part of the Plowshares movement. And so she and some folks both broke into a nuclear facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And one of the reasons she did it was because she said, there's nobody depending on me now. And I know the rest of you have children or jobs or families, and that if we get sent to jail, which they did, you know, that's going to be a lot harder for you than it is for me. And so she said, I love her quote. She said, I asked myself, how could I not, you know? And she spent 2 years in jail then, from 82 to 84 in jail. But she felt, because she recognized just what you're saying, that it's harder for the people who have those depending on them.
Well, thank you everyone for such great questions and dialogue. And I know that KK and Shane are open and available to engage further. And with that said, I just wanted to wrap up with a final question with quick answers from both of you. What can we all on this call and beyond learn from you through all of your collaborations and experiences you bring to the table to be better social justice co-conspirators? And just if you could sort of rapid fire share any ideas or tools or tips you have to act and engage. And of course, reading more books like Activist and attending Liberty Hill's upcoming Upton Sinclair event, which I know the link to it was shared in the chat. It's free this year. I know we're hoping for it to be in person next year, and would love to see all of you who can make it there in person eventually.
Thank you, Marta, for that. Yes, there'll be a slide that shows all that. I mean, I would say one of the things that we undervalue is the role of philanthropy and giving. And, you know, when Liberty Hill, that's what we do. We fund these leaders on the front lines and these community organizations. And it's amazing what they can do with very few resources. I think some people feel like, oh God, if I care about racism and I can only give, you know, $150, what good is that going to do? But you'd be amazed what these grassroots groups can do with a small amount of money, including, you know, making sure that their community leaders have Wi-Fi and devices so they can show up via Zoom to a city council meeting and demand a rent moratorium. You know, all that stuff costs money, and I don't think there's any greater thing we can do than fuel their courage and their work on the front lines.
And I would say, you know, just to pile on that, is just the sense of, you know, get involved in a community, whatever community it is, whether it's Liberty Hill, you know, other things. Other people are doing things, and each person is going to have a different thing they can bring. You know, if you're a storyteller, you can help tell stories. You know, you can help support the work financially. You can show up to the meetings. There are lots, you know, there are lots of concrete steps you can do, and it's so good when you connect with a community that's doing it and sort of figure out how to plug in your own very specific skills.
Well,
so thank you so much. This is really inspiring.
Thank you. A lot of leaders on this call and folks that are doing similar work, engaged in different and similar ways. So I just love building community and connections and collaborations. So Most of you on this call know me directly and personally, or colleagues and or friends or childhood friends. So if anyone wants to be connected to somebody else or is thinking about something that they want to get involved in, feel free to ping me about it and I can connect away. So I think that's it. Have a great evening, whether it's 6 or 9, and I hope to see you all in person soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.